What's up everyone, it's Endymion, and since Star Wars Celebration, there has been a disturbance in the balance of pop culture, where millions of fans groaned in unison as Disney and Lucasfilm announced that Rey would be brought back in a new movie. Some may have been hyped, while many others saw this announcement as Disney unwilling to learn from their past failures, as Hollywood keeps pushing what fans reject. And it begs the question, why does nobody seem to like these identity politically driven or woke characters? Let's talk about it. What rubs many the wrong way about Rey isn't that she's a woman, although I'm sure there are those out there who hate her simply for that, but I'm not one of them. The real reason why I particularly dislike the character and this announcement of her making a new Jedi Order is that Rey is essentially assuming the role that Luke should have had instead. Unfortunately, Disney made Luke into a bumbling hobo who drinks alien milk and tries to kill his nephew, and to really put the nail in the coffin, they also killed off Luke as well. All the expanded universe lore surrounding Luke could now in retrospect not be used since the legacy of the character was finished. But the sad truth is that Lucasfilm and Disney found a way to remove Luke from the story and replace his legacy with a younger character instead. When it comes to a lot of new age media, there's been quite a few characters created that could be considered self-inserts of their creators. A good example of this is Mariko Tamaki, who's the author of the YA graphic novel I Am Not Starfire, where the beautiful supermodel Starfire has a fat daughter that looks more like the Penguin than being related to Starfire herself. Her daughter, whose name is Mandy, also looks strikingly similar to her creator, which many, as you'd expect, have pointed out. Then of course you have Velma and Mindy Kaling, which I don't need to explain. Of course, self-inserts are nothing new when it comes to media, as it's likely impossible for a creator to not in some way insert parts of themselves into the very characters they create. A good example of this would be Peter Parker, as Spider-Man looks a lot like one of his creators, Steve Ditko. But the difference between someone like Peter and Mandy is that Peter actually became something that stood the test of time and grew and expanded and built their own legacy. Where likely until I mentioned Mandy in this video, you probably haven't even thought of or knew that character even existed. To swing back to Star Wars again, Rey feels like a self-insert, but in the worst way possible. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Rey was a self-insert of Star Wars' biggest villain herself, Kathleen Kennedy. A woman who's so hated by the fan base that even during Star Wars Celebration, many didn't clap or woo her as she went on stage.
Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy!
Because the damage she has done to the brand and Disney at large at this point is stained by her diluted touch. Rey is a terrible self-insert character because she doesn't add nothing to the story she's in. She is simply Luke Skywalker but a woman, but without any of the problems or weaknesses. Instead, she's capable of doing anything and everything herself, even breaking out of prison in Force Awakens on her own, even though she's only known how to use the Force for maybe 5 minutes at this point. Rey is the ultimate bad character because of this, and I honestly feel bad for Daisy Ridley because she's just doing what she's told by the writers, directors, and producers who employ her. There was something there in Awakens, a glimmer that she could have been a great character, but this potential was sadly wasted. And then it was exemplified when she was not only assuming the role that was originally Luke's, she also took his last name too. Rey and her self-inserted creator Kathleen Kennedy are the worst thing to happen to Star Wars since its creation. Many could argue that the reason why fans are so against Rey is because she's a new character and nobody wants new stuff, they just want what they liked before. But this is clearly not true since we have had plenty of characters made in the years before and since that disprove this. Starkiller, for example, was a character people really liked, and The Force Unleashed when it came out became the best-selling Star Wars game ever at the time, even outpacing KOTOR. Grogu is another great addition, and so is Din Djarin, but people clearly don't like when they're sold something as one thing but get subverted into experiencing something that they don't want. The Mandalorian recently has largely replaced Din and Grogu with Bo-Katan, and even the producers of the show say anyone can now be the Mandalorian.
We've been on the journey of the show, and now that we're at this point, is that what does that title mean? And I think now with Bo possessing the dark saber, I know that there was a lot of expectations that might have shifted both in terms of what it meant for Din Djarin, but also for Bo, and what does it mean? Who is the Mandalorian right at this point? And so I think it could be anyone, and I think that's what they're trying to define in many ways, is what does that mean to be Mandalorian?
We want our Space Dad and Goblin Son story, and even though the show was marketed as such, once you watch it, the duo are sidelined for other characters. It's not even that Bo is a bad character, it's just that no one is watching the show for her when we've been invested in Din and Grogu. If I can put this into an analogy for you, switching out Bo for the duo is like going to a steakhouse and having the advertisements promoted as a place for barbecued beef. But when you enter, the menu actually has no steak on it, and instead everything is replaced with fish. And then you're being called an idiot or an anti-fish eater because you went to the steakhouse expecting steak. But now everyone who works there hates you because you don't want what they're selling, and that's how all of this feels. We wanted steak and potatoes, but you're feeding us halibut and soy milk. The fan base has every right to be disappointed about this kind of stuff. It's not to say that you can't have good characters that are people of color or women, as one of my favorite characters of the past decade and then some is Agent 355 from Y: The Last Man. She's an incredibly badass special agent whose sole purpose is to protect the last remaining man on Earth. Her determination and willingness to see her mission through is not only filled with comedy, but a horrible tragedy as well. 355 is an amazing character who's also black and a woman, and she's also believable and fits perfectly into the world of Y: The Last Man. Another character I really love is from a comic called Punk Rock Jesus, where a company revives Jesus through strands of DNA and makes a reality show out of the second coming of Christ for television ratings. This second Jesus is protected by a capable and deeply troubled man named Thomas McKeel. Thomas is a badass bodyguard whose nickname is the Cemetery because of all the crosses on his back he has tattooed signifying all the people he's killed. Punk Rock Jesus is also just a damn fine limited series, and I strongly recommend it if you haven't read it. But the point stands that good original characters do still exist out there in the wider world, but unfortunately, when it comes to mainstream companies like Marvel for example, they can't help but keep pushing these terrible woke ideas instead. A good example of this is Deadpool, who in a recent issue has begun dating Valentine Vuong, an assassin who was originally an enemy of Wade's. While this all may seem fine, the more I dug in, the more obvious and self-inserting it became. You see, it would be one thing to announce that Deadpool has a new girlfriend, except whenever you read an article about this, the selling point is that this new character is non-binary. And I had a creeping suspicion, so of course I dived in deeper, and the writer of this Deadpool series is Alyssa Wong, who of course is also non-binary. Meaning this series is just a fanfic where the writer has self-inserted a non-binary Vietnamese character who is very specifically just like their creator, and wrote it so that they can bang Deadpool. It's Tumblr levels of cringe, but this is how things are now. Thankfully, there has been good characters that are also diverse, but unfortunately, I do wish there were more that were given proper respect and real characterization. Aya and Bayek from Assassin's Creed are some of my favorite characters in that franchise, and they are both not only diverse, but extremely integral to their franchise and fans love them. Another miss by the modern comics industry was Jonathan Kent, who became the new Superman. Except his only defining characteristic wasn't his heroism, legacy, or villains, but simply that he was bisexual. And having the new Superman be bi did little in the long run, with the series being cancelled because like many of these woke characters, their identities are surface level at best. And I know some people will say that it's odd that I'm against gay Superman or self-insert non-binary Deadpool love interest, but I'm totally fine with Peter Parker looking like Steve Ditko. Why Peter Parker works where so many of these woke failures don't is because when it comes to characters like Spider-Man, he's so much more than just his sexuality or skin color. Peter is a young man whose life gets changed by the spider bite. He loses his uncle because of his own hubris. And while he has the riz of a literal god, Peter also suffers immensely, but never lets it bring him down and inspires those around him. When I think of someone like Peter, I think of his characteristics as heroic, selfless, loving, and strong. He's a character many people can see themselves in regardless of gender, skin color, or whatever else. It's the same with Agent 355. I think of her as adaptive, strong-willed, and incredibly badass. Her being black or a woman doesn't matter because at her core, she's a strong character. But when I look at Jonathan Kent, the only quality he has is that he's bisexual. That's all any of these new age characters are now. They are simply created for diversity checkpoints so websites will write articles about them. But the reality is that these controversies usually never translate to true long-standing sales, and it proves that consumers want their characters to be defined more besides what's in their pants or whose pants they want in. Speaking of Spider-Man, one of the newer characters added to the mythos is the alternate universe version of Miles Morales' sister. Her name is Bobby Morales and her superhero name is Spider Smasher. And she looks like a cheap knockoff of an Attack on Titan character with the overused half-shaved haircut. Then there's Spider-Boy, whose real name is Bailey and apparently has the exact same origin story as the Sentry, who's Marvel's version of Superman basically. They're not even trying anymore. However, if you want an example of a character that became a breakout success and is fairly recent, we can look at Dr. Aphra, who first appeared in the Darth Vader comic book series. Aphra is a morally ambiguous character that kills and manipulates people and is also a woman of color and meets all of those sexual identity nonsense things every company is so crazy about. But while Aphra does tick certain ideological boxes, she managed to have her own comic book series and became a character that shined even when put beside icons like Darth Vader. So it's not that people don't like new characters or those of color and so on, they just want well-written characters that are complex. I understand that writers want to diversify their characters, but it becomes increasingly agenda-driven and eye-rolling when almost every prominent character is gay. Look, I understand that gay people need representation, but we went from a little bit of representation to the point where characters are being retconned into having their sexuality changed for pandering reasons. Why else would DC Comics suddenly say one of their Robins is gay, or John Kent? It's not being done in order to flesh the character out, it's simply written that way so places like CBR will write an article. And Twitter people will virtually pat the creators on the back while not spending a dime supporting these ideas. Only to complain that people hate gay characters until they make more gay characters and then they don't support those either, and the cycle of lunacy continues. Honestly, one of the best additions to Star Wars in years was Gina Carano's Cara Dune, who was supposed to get her own spin-off show. But the absurdity that Disney would cancel an actual strong female role model over politics is so very much the perfect encapsulation of our current world. You can't just have a character be gay, they have to also align exactly how you want them when it comes to your politics and views as well. Having a strong female character isn't enough if that woman doesn't bend the knee or parrots all the talking points too. It's because of this very clear bias that many fans are disillusioned and tired of many things. The burnout of having the things we love being ruined or paraded for woke points is why I do what I do. There needs to be a middle ground where we can have representation, but it shouldn't come at the cost of deplatforming others. If fans are so against characters of color, then why was everyone stoked when Ahmed Best played a Jedi Master in Mando? Why did no one complain or have an issue when Kang was announced to be played by Jonathan Majors? Or why did Creed 3 make over $250 million on a franchise that primarily started with a straight white man as its lead character? The difference is that when it comes to characters like Creed, he doesn't replace Rocky but instead respects and honors the legacy. Creed in a lot of ways is the opposite of Rey. He forged his own place in that franchise and built a story that honors what came before without ruining the original movies. Rey is now in the unfortunate unique position to appropriate and transform all of Luke's expanded history and make it her own. That doesn't make Rey a good character, it makes her an imposter that didn't earn what she has. Ultimately, the reason why people don't like woke characters is because they don't offer anything actually unique. They are simply checklists so modern creators can fail upwards into ruining more stuff they should have no part in. This is why The Acolyte so far has people on edge when one of their lead actors says things like Star Wars is very patriarchal. Which makes you question if the actress in question, whose name is Jodie Turner-Smith, even knows what she's talking about. She goes on to say, quote, "My character, you know, she's a powerful leader. She's a powerful leader in a very woman-centered world, which I was very excited to kind of be in that because I feel like Star Wars is very patriarchal. So it was kind of cool to have this sort of woman-centered figure," end quote. Also, it's really hard for me to say patriarchal. I can't say it. Moving on. Either Jodie Turner-Smith is blind or hasn't seen any of Star Wars in the last year. Since movies like Rogue One starred a woman, and there's an entire sequel trilogy where everyone kisses the toes of the female characters constantly. If anything, Star Wars from a movie or TV sense in the last 10 years is anything but, oh god, patriarchal. I can't say it. If anything, Star Wars from a movie or TV sense in the last 10 years is anything but patriarchal. I think a more fitting word would be cucked, but what do I know? I only actually watch these things and make videos on the internet about them. It does seem that the nonsense of today's world will not end anytime soon, but I have a creeping suspicion that the inevitable Episode 10 of Star Wars will not do as well as Disney hopes. And these lazy self-inserts like Mandy, non-binary Deadpool love interest, or half-shaved haircut Spider-Person will have as much impact as the greats they so desperately cling onto. Because in the end, the ideology and color of someone is just that, it's skin deep. No one race or group is inherently evil or lesser simply due to the pigment of their skin, and each person should be judged based on their own character instead. But when your character's defining traits are their body fat index being high or what they're attracted to, it's no wonder these ideas are dead on arrival. So reject the modern nonsense of today and embrace real, actual well-written media. Go read Punk Rock Jesus or The Legend of Luther Strode. Play games with fun characters like in Resident Evil 4 and enjoy movies where the people involved actually care about the legacy they're building on. And the reason why nobody likes woke characters is because they are not written as people first, but as checklists for idiots who only see people for their skin color or sexual identity. And in the words of Master Yoda himself,
"That is why you fail."